Let's continue with Goldhawk Fights Back. In for Dale Goldhawk, here's Jane Brown.
Good morning to you and happy St. Patrick's Day. It's an extra special day for those of us who have Irish heritage, including myself. I was driving in this morning to the Zoomerplex and thinking about my great-grandfather, Eldon Dunn Brown. That sounds Irish, doesn't it? And thinking about the challenges they faced when they came as new immigrants to Canada. It's the ongoing Canadian experience. Immigration, it all depends on when your family came over, but we all share that as Canadians. And today we celebrate the Irish heritage for those of us who have it. And of course, everybody wants to be Irish on St. Patrick's Day. And it's true that most people who consume beer today will likely be buying it at their local Irish pub. But for every other day than St. Patrick's Day, the conversation continues about whether beer and wine should be sold in Ontario grocery stores. If you've been following the news, then you know that the governing Liberals at Queen's Park are preparing to unveil a plan to liberalize beer and wine sales in Ontario. The latest comment comes from Economic Development Minister Brad Dougad, who emphasized yesterday that things are being finalized and the province is awaiting final recommendations from former TD Bank Chair Ed Clark's advisory panel on government assets. He says one of the reasons Ed Clark was asked to do this work is because he has a very good business sense. So he's being asked to look at all of the consequences, intended or unintended, including impact on the economy. There is more to the plan, and it would appear to benefit craft brewers. Steve Beauchesne is the co-founder of Beau's all-natural brewing company and vice chair of Ontario Craft Brewers, and he joins us on the line. Steve, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Hi, Jane. How you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Very good.
Do craft breweries do green beer like the big breweries?
Well, a lot of us do very sustainable beer, so you can drink green beer in a very different sense if you drink local craft beer.
And how's that?
Well, a lot of us are certified organic, like Beau's is. A lot of us do a lot of very cool energy initiatives, like Steam Whistle. Mill Street also has an organic beer. And when you're buying beer that's made locally, it wasn't shipped halfway around the world, so it's always a little bit easier on the environment that way.
Oh, so putting a different kind of green in green beer.
That's right.
I like that. Okay, give us a quick crash course on the craft brewery industry in Ontario, when it started, why it started, and why it's become so popular.
Sure. Craft beer really kicked off, I would say, in the early 80s with Brick Brewing and a few others that sort of were pioneers. And it basically started because people would have just the very generic light lagers that were available in Ontario. And then they would travel abroad and find out that beer was made very differently in Europe. A few enterprising entrepreneurs came back and decided to open up their own breweries. And this is a phenomenon that seemed to happen pretty much right across North America, throughout Canada and throughout the United States. And what's been really interesting is in starting these new breweries, most of them started off wanting to bring very traditional beers that were unavailable in their local markets, but then they started experimenting, and craft brewers are now creating brand new styles. They're doing all sorts of wonderful things with beer, and it's funny, I had a conversation with the brewmaster for La Chouffe, which is an old Belgian brewery, and he was telling me about how his breweries introduced their first new brand in ages because they've been so inspired by the North American craft brewing industry that now these ancient breweries are kind of, now they're looking over at what we're doing in North America and saying, oh, this is really cool. We can still innovate in beer.
Canadians inspiring all over the world in different ways. 416-360-0740, 1-866-740-4740. We'd like any of your comments, not just about craft breweries, but on the proposal, the idea that's being floated that beer and wine could soon be sold in grocery stores. Not all grocery stores in Ontario. It looks like about 20% of the grocery stores. Now, you're the best person, Steve, to tell us about how the craft brew industry is about to change in this province, if in fact the liberalization takes place.
That's right. And it's important to note that while we're not necessarily against beer being in grocery stores, this is not at all what we've been asking for. What we've been asking for is fundamental changes within the beer store system to take down the barriers to enter that system and to make it fair for us to sell in the beer store. And we've also been asking for the right to open our own stores. If Molson's, Labatt's, and Sleeman are allowed to open stores, why can't small brewers open their own stores? Recognizing that we don't want to create a third monopoly, wanting to sort of make it so that each brewery could open one or two independent craft beer stores of their own, and then be able to sell other craft breweries' brands alongside their own. We're a very collaborative industry, so that's really what we've been hoping we would see change for. And I would say that, as the budget's coming closer, we're still quite hopeful that these changes will happen. But this kind of surprise announcement about the grocery stores has taken us a little bit by surprise, and it doesn't necessarily address any of the big issues that we have as craft brewers, which is fairness, and it's about access to be able to sell our beer to customers.
And you don't feel, based on what you're hearing or what you know personally, that craft breweries will be represented in grocery stores alongside the products of the big brewers?
Well, the concerns are that, one, the grocery stores might turn around and charge us stocking fees, which would make it very difficult to make money in that system. We can't afford the same kind of shelf fees that a large brewer could. And then the second side of that is we don't know how much space they're going to be opening up, and out of that space, we don't know how much is going to be specifically for craft brewers. And that can be a big worry, especially when you look at, we've got a new craft brewery opening in Ontario almost every week right now, and those brewers have a very tough time getting shelf space because there's basically none left in the LCBO. The LCBO has been doing a phenomenal job of supporting craft beer, but they're having a tough time keeping up with the total amount of craft beer coming. And the beer store is so expensive to get into that it's virtually impossible to sell beer there. And then even if you could afford the listing fee at the beer store, they turn around and hide your beer in the back of the warehouse where no one's ever going to find it anyways.
We're speaking with Steve Beauchesne. He's the co-founder of Beau's All-Natural Brewing Company and vice chair of the Ontario Craft Brewers. Now, we are getting an indication that there will be shelf space for the consumer to see craft brewers in the beer store. That has been leaked from the government.
And that's great, and we welcome that. It's a little bit concerning for us because we don't know how much. And if a grocery store is going to have say a total of 20 spots for beer, is there going to be only 5 for craft breweries? We've got over 100 breweries that are going to be wanting to get their beer on that shelf. And while the more established craft brewers will probably benefit from this, and I'm lucky enough that my brewery is one of the more established ones in the province, there's going to be all those new guys that are fighting to get their brand new product on the shelf. And the grocery stores might do a phenomenal job of it. We don't know. And we also don't know if they're going to be charging for shelf listing fees. And we don't know if they're going to turn around and charge us much higher stocking fees and ongoing sort of margins. And that for a craft brewery in Ontario right now, you need to be selling 5,000 hectoliters, which is it's about 500,000 liters of beer before you even think of hitting break even. And so for a small brewery, any kind of change in that margin could in essence put a lot of people either out of business or really stunt their growth.
500,000 liters of beer before you're making a profit.
But that's before you hit break even, yeah.
That's before you hit break even. That is incredible. Now,
yeah, it's an industry where there's a lot of people with a lot of love and a lot of passion, but it's a very fragile industry, and we've got to be very careful about the changes that come forward to make sure it protects the craft brew industry.
What is it that intrigues beer drinkers about trying the craft breweries? Because we are talking, for the most part, we are looking at sometimes a higher price point, right? Because of the challenges that you're facing in bringing your beer to the market. But what is it about the craft beer experience that's inviting beer drinkers to give it a try?
It's a great question. And when you think about how much power is in those top few breweries, it's amazing that craft beer exists at all. And I think it's a real testament to the passion and the power of craft beer. What's really important about craft beer is one, you've got a sense of discovery. So when you travel someplace, you can learn about the local place that you're in by trying the local beer. It's also a bit of hometown pride to be able to say, you know what, this is made in my town by people I know. And it also has that, you have that ability to have an actual relationship with the person that you're purchasing from. But I always like to say it always comes back to the beer. And when you are running a small craft brewery, you make your fan base by creating something that's new, something that's different. And if people really like it, they'll latch on to it. And I think that's really the main difference with craft brewers is we can experiment, we can innovate, and we can try things. And when they don't succeed, we say, okay, we've learned from that, and we try something else.
Are you Steve, are you influencing the big beer makers to change their recipes at all, or to change the way that they make their beverages?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at all the, I would say, pseudo or fake craft brands out there, they've definitely taken notice. And there's a lot of brands out there that are trying to emulate craft beer from the big brewers. And the big brewers are also trying to purchase small craft breweries so that they can try to access the same type of customer.
Okay,
but
let's
think that,
sure.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, let's get to some callers here, because I know people want to offer their opinions about selling beer in grocery stores and craft beer as well. Eileen from Thornhill, what do you have to say today?
Yes, hi. My whole point is I don't think that the government is in any way trying to do this as a convenience to the customer. That's just a laugh. But once again, it's another way that they can just cut well-paying jobs, because in this case, is it going to be the person that's controlling it, this teenager that's working in this grocery store?
Yes, you're thinking about a cashier, a 16, 17-year-old cashier late at night faced with somebody who may be intoxicated.
By teens working in grocery stores. But not only that, how many people is this going to put out of work that are getting well-paying jobs? Because let's face it, the government has already done as much as they can to the healthcare system by making it a skeleton system. Now they jokingly say it's a convenience for people.
What do you say to that, Steve? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really glad, Eileen, that you brought up the issue of jobs. Craft brewers in the province, we only sell about 4% of the actual beer in the province, and we've got 30% of the brewery jobs in the province. So any change that's going to improve access for craft brewers is going to increase jobs in the brewing industry. The way I understand this government's proposal for grocery stores, it shouldn't take away any jobs, because it shouldn't take away any ability for the beer store. And I don't see it necessarily adding jobs either. It seems to be fairly job neutral. The issue of security for both the cashier and for the province, that's something that's going to have to be handled by either training or specific employment laws. But I absolutely agree. It's something that needs to be addressed properly.
Goldhawk Fights Back for You airs Monday to Friday, 11 to 1 on AM 740 Zoomer Radio.
Now, let's continue with Goldhawk Fights Back. In for Dale Goldhawk, here's Jane Brown.
Along with Steve Beauchesne, co-founder of Beau's All-Natural Brewing Company and the vice chair of Ontario Craft Brewers, talking about the hot-button issue these days in Ontario, selling beer and wine in the province's grocery stores, or at least a percentage of the province's grocery stores. Do you like the idea of greater access to beer and wine? Or are you a fan of craft beer and you'd like to see it on more store shelves, either at the beer store or in the grocery store? 416-360-0740 or 1-866-740-4740. We've got Ronald on the line from Cambridge. Hi, Ronald.
Hi there. I remember back in the late 1950s, I was a small boy. My father mentioned to me about Brewers Retail, saying there must be a different type of system. Now, close to 60 years later, we have the same system. It hasn't changed.
Yeah, that's an interesting look at the history of the province and how beer has been sold for, well, since Prohibition, basically, right, Steve?
Yes.
That's right, yeah. And it's interesting. There are some parts about the beer store, the brewer's retail system that are quite cool. You don't really find that kind of recycling program like that anywhere else in the world. And it is a very efficient way to get beer to people. It's just that they really don't do anything to let people browse. There's no shopping experience. And they've really done a lot to limit the growth of craft brewers, which in essence is a way of sort of not allowing the consumers, the customers, to decide what should be on that shelf, like any other retailer would do.
You know, interesting, as you're speaking there about that topic, I think about being in the LCBO, my local LCBO, and they'll often be giving out samples of wine. You wonder why the craft brewers aren't invited to do the same thing in the atrium or the entry area of a beer store.
And they do allow craft brewers to do that as well as any brewery for that matter. You don't see it as often. It's a bidding process, so it can be difficult to get a tasting there. And not all craft brewers, again, we're very small, so it's hard to be able to get to all the stores to be able to do that. But I know our brewery regularly will do LCBO tastings, and it's a great way to be able to, sort of put a glass of beer in someone's hand and not just tell them about it, but say, here, try it. It's different. It's wonderful.
I guess this goes back to what you're saying, that the LCBO is actually doing a good job in promoting craft beer.
The LCBO has been doing phenomenal. Our growth rate in the LCBO has been in the double digits for the last 8 to 10 years. They really support it. They really promote it. And they allow the customer to see the product. I think that's a really big benefit for the LCBO system. And most craft brewers who have been selling in the LCBO would tell you that their growth rate there is phenomenal. What I think the LCBO is struggling with right now is the sheer volume of craft beer that's trying to get into those shelves. I don't think the LCBO was ever envisioned to be a beer store. That was
right.
The whole point of having a separate liquor store and a beer store.
Right.
And the LCBO has been kind of shouldering the weight because there hasn't been another retail chain for us to sell our beer into.
Let's get to Patricia from Aurora. Say hi to Steve, Patricia.
Hello.
And you have a question for us today on Goldhawk?
Yes, I do. I come from the UK originally, and all our stores over there sell beer and wine and whiskey, and when you're doing your grocery shopping, you just move over to this part of the store that sell these things if you want them.
I
can't see what the big deal is here about all that. Why can't they do the same thing?
Why is there such a big deal about this, Steve? Why is this concept so controversial in Ontario?
It's a wonderful question, and anytime you travel anywhere else and see that beer and wine are sold in the grocery store and the world hasn't gone to chaos in those areas,
yeah, right.
You kind of wonder about why we're being so worried about it here. From a craft brewer's perspective, what we're worried about is it's very difficult to make money as a craft brewer, and we're mostly worried about what changes might happen to the sort of our margins if we suddenly have to start paying stocking fees and listing fees. But from the consumer's perspective, I completely agree. There's anytime you've been to a grocery store that sells beer and wine in a different part of the world, you realize that it's not a big deal. And, if every other jurisdiction pretty much in North America has been able to figure it out, you kind of wonder why it's such a scary thing here. But like I said, with the beer store model, the recycling, I think, is a really big thing that needs to be protected, because everywhere else in the world, as far as I know, they don't have the beer bottle return system. And that maybe a lot of people don't understand how powerful that is. Instead of those bottles just being recycled, the bottles actually make it back to the brewery. They get just washed and then reused, which is so much of an energy savings plus from an environmental perspective, that system should be preserved in whatever kind of changes we do in Ontario. And if suddenly every grocery store was selling beer, there'd be very little reason necessarily to bring your bottles back to the beer store, and it might make that system fragile.
Okay, we want to get to the rest of our calls here with time running out ahead of news. Here's James on his cell phone. Hi, James.
Hi there, how are you?
Good, how are you? What kind of question do you have for us?
Well, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment. A statement was made that they're very worried about people of the age of 14, 15, 16 selling beer. In Ontario, we have a law that you have to be at least 18 to sell booze.
That brings up a good question about cashiers and grocery stores once again, Steve.
Absolutely, and obviously the government's going to have to, either through training or through employment policies, figure that out, because they will need to make sure that the proper protections are in place. Mm-hmm. But like I said, this is something where they've figured it out pretty much everywhere else in the world. I think they can figure it out in Ontario, too, in a way that's safe.
Steve, I've enjoyed our conversation today. Thanks for your time.
Oh, I really appreciate your interest, Jane. Thanks so much.
Steve Beauchesne is the co-founder of Beau's All-Natural Brewing Company and vice chair of the Ontario Craft Brewers. Even more appropriate to have this conversation on St. Patrick's Day.
Goldhawk Fights Back for You airs Monday to Friday, 11 to 1 on AM 740, Zoomer Radio.